Hi, my name is Jim and I was retired. In this video, I'm going to continue the tour of my spreadsheet that I use to plan out withdrawals in my forced early retirement. So stay tuned for part 2 of my DIY Retirement Withdrawal Strategy. After I was retired 5 years ago, I began to research a lot of spreadsheets on the internet to figure out if there was an alternative to those expensive fee-only financial planners. And as you recall from the last video, I've decided to build my own spreadsheet. In part 1 of my tour of the spreadsheet, we looked at the input sheet. And like many DIY projects, I'm going to go back and show you the correction I had to make, particularly in the calculation of compound annual growth rate. I'll show you that correction and what I did to fix it. And then the most of this video will show you the main sheet or base case of my retirement withdrawal strategy. And I'll show you exactly how I built that sheet out. Before I do, I'll begin with my standard word of caution. I am not an expert. I have no initials after my name. So take this as entertaining ideas from one educated consumer to another. Always do your own due diligence and seek out a professional if you need one. Hey, and be sure to like and subscribe to this channel and hit that bell over there for notifications on more of this series on my DIY retirement withdrawal strategy. I'm designing this in Apple numbers, but these are very simple spreadsheet functions that will work the same in Excel or Google Sheets. Just follow along with the same basic principles. Let me explain the error that I discovered and how I fixed it. First, I built this spreadsheet and this model portfolio to approximate what my portfolio looks like, but sizing it around $1 million. And I masked all of the accounts and the asset names. And if you recall from my previous video series on managing my asset allocations across all my buckets, this is the same data set. When I brought it into this spreadsheet, I realized that down here in the place where I'm calculating the compound annual growth rate over the last 5.04 years, that the figure that I had here was wrong. I didn't account for the cash outside of my invested assets. So what I've done here is I've gone back and instead of $740,000, which yielded, by the way, up here, yielded CAGR that I showed you last time of 7.51%. When I increased the cash cushion by $180,000, so now giving me a new April 1st, 2016 portfolio total of $920,000. And it yielded like a 2.96% CAGR, which then after the real rate of return was really dismal. And I said, this can't possibly be right. Well, what I did was I researched over the last week about CAGR, and I want to give a shout out to the YouTube channel Finally Learning, because they gave me a great CAGR explanation and a way of thinking about this that yields a much more accurate estimate. Think of it as an investment bond in an entity called Retirement Inc. And that investment bond has been yielding about $60,000 for the last 5 years. And if you add that into the formula here as a payment, show that up here, I'm using formula text to show you the actual formula that I'm using here. When you add the H14 annual expenses into the formula, you get 9.14%. And that actually fits better with my experience in the last 5 years. So that'll be the rate. And of course, I'm using the Fisher formula up here to give me a real CAGR, real rate of return of 5.96%. And that'll be the figure that I use in the sheets going forward to look at earnings of my investment portfolio. Now, why CAGR and not an average annual rate? Average annual rate really gives you a result that's not accurate. It actually can be too high if you use an average annual, and I'll go through that in a future video. But CAGR is recognized as a smoothed out rate of return that gives you the result. Now, it does mask up and down. You have to watch out for that. And also, any reading based on past performance is not always the most accurate way of predicting future performance, as they tell you. But what I'm using is the best information that I have. So here's the overall structure of the main sheet, which is my base scenario. Rather than go through this, I'm going to go through the process of building it so that you can follow along. So I'll go over to this on-screen example. So the first thing I'm going to do is create the columns over here that begin the process. So I'm going to come down one row, retirement and spouse age. And then to populate these, I'm going to go back to the input screen, and I'm going to use the equal sign, go over to input, and gather the things that you need from this first series of numbers. And I'm going to size these resize columns to fit content. And then here, I'm just going to use this formula, simple, this plus 1, and come down, let's say, stop there, but it'll continue that way. Now you could do a series fill or do this simple trick here. And I'm going to do that. And then that way this populates. So that populates the header rows. And I'm going to do a little bit of formatting of the table here to say 2 header rows, and I'm going to say 4 header columns. So the next thing I'm going to do is just expand this out, and I'm going to type in the names of the accounts that I'm going to start with tax deferred accounts. So I'm going to say your IRA, your 401k, spouse IRA, annuity, Roth IRA, Roth 401k, a spouse Roth IRA. Now, I don't have one on my Quicken sheet yet, but I'm going to create it ahead of time for later Roth conversion planning. Broker balance, savings, and then final total retirement assets. Sometimes abbreviations help when you're fitted into a smaller space. Table. There. Those are all the account names. Now I'm going to use that row 1, and I'm going to use some merge cells just to identify the 3 buckets of our assets. So I'm going to come above these and now do table merge cells and label. Now you have the basic structure of the column cells. The next 3 columns, and I'm going to use those for fixed income sources. So let me just add 3 more. 1, 2, 3. Those will be for the fixed income. So they're all under the fixed in category. And I'm going to start with, I'm just going to put zeros in here for now because we're at 0 for all of those. And I'm going to continue to build the column headers. Now the first thing to do is now create a set of column headers for withdrawals and deposits to the accounts. So I'm in retirement, there won't be any new deposits into my IRA or 401k, but there will be in Roths, brokerage and savings. So I'm going to gather all of these headers and I'm going to copy, and then I'm going to come over here and paste. And that will create new column headers. And in each one, I'm just going to go in and add WD to them. And then label this total withdrawal. Now, it's important to keep the columns in the same order for the formulas to work easier going forward. And so that's why I've just copied the same pattern of accounts over for withdrawals and deposits. So after total withdrawal, I'm going to put in withdrawal rate. And then that'll be nothing more than the total withdrawals into the total retirement assets to give you a withdrawal rate. I'll show you that formula in a bit. Next, I'm going to create all of the columns for earnings. And then finally, I added a last column here, total available income. After total available income, I'm going to put in expenses. And then a column entitled shortfall surplus. And I'm going to do that. Let me show you some of the formulas that we're going to do to populate the row here. The first few cells in row 3 are going to be all values that we pull from the Quicken value sheet. So it's important to find the right accounts. And so I'm going to go through the process here. Now, in the case of my 401k, the 401k number is a total number, and I need to manually identify the Roth 401k numbers and subtract that. So I'm going to do that first, and then I'm going to calculate my 401k. And so I'm going to come over here and identify the assets that make up my 401k in this sample set are about $99,000 in Roth. And so now I can create a number that comes up with my 401k with this formula. And that number now represents the tax-deferred portion of the 401k. So for my spouse IRA number, I'm actually going to include a small 403b that needs to be rolled into this IRA at some point. So it's this number plus this number. Roth IRA I know is 0 for now, so I'm just going to put a 0 here. Now the brokerage balance is actually the addition of 3 different accounts. It'll include a brokerage account here, brokerage account here, and some treasury bonds. And finally, savings is this number down here of cash held outside of the invested assets. Then this is the sum of these numbers. Format that. Now I like to highlight all of these that are pulling from the Quicken with a fill that shows that they're they're being filled by a formula. I'm just going to go forward and format a few merged cells to label these columns that we've created. I'm coming to the end of the 15-minute mark on this part 2 of making my DIY retirement withdrawal strategy spreadsheet. And so come back for the third part when I'll go back through the formulas to show you the first row of these withdrawal calculations are going to be based on a payment formula, and I'm going to show that in my next video. So come back for part 3. Join me next week for part 3 when I show you how to calculate those withdrawals from tax-deferred accounts, and I'll also show you how I estimate taxable income and my estimated tax, and then finally how I come up with my surplus or shortfall after taxes on this spreadsheet. I will be covering more subjects like this on how to manage a forced early retirement. So if these topics appeal to you, please be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. Thank you.